Hello and welcome. So a lot of times you see us touring pristine condominiums, new construction, updated homes, some homes needing a little bit of renovation. But when you see us tour a brand new condominium, I think it's really interesting to see how these units start and some of the things that go into them. So here we are on I Street. This is a project that's probably going to take about 12 months from the time that it was acquired to the time that it's ready to go back on the market. And as you can see, we're taking a little bit of tour of what these properties look like when they're purchased, and then how you'll see in time what it looks like when they're finished. So here we are. We have a home that's been probably sitting in this condition for at least 30 or 40 years. We have radiant heat floors. You can tell there's definitely some lean to the walls, lean to the floors. You can look at that door frame right in the kitchen if you can see it, where it's just a little bit slanted. And of course it's a little dark in here because not all the lights work, but if you look here at the door frame, right there, you can see just the level of crookedness that it is. Obviously it wasn't built that way, but it's become that way due to structural deficiencies over time. And then you can see here we have need for cosmetic paint, and this property you would say is probably beyond the level of just needing to be cosmetically renovated. You really need to fix some structural problems. So part of the construction is we'll remove all the flooring of this house, all the walls, and get it back exposed to the brick, and then re-level everything out and rebuild it back up. So you'll basically just have the front wall of the house and the two adjoining walls, which we call party walls in DC, still standing. Here we are in the sun porch of this property. This will be torn completely off the home, rebuilt as an addition. This is fully enclosed right now. This was originally a sun porch. These houses back in the era before air conditioning, you wanted some outdoor air and some outdoor space, and so this was a porch that would have been an open air porch for some time. And most of these homes, these were enclosed in the 70s and 80s to become functional, useful space in the house. But because they were built as porches and they're not brick construction like the core of the home, they don't really withstand time very well. You can tell I'm continuing to go down the hill in this corner. And so this will be completely removed. A new addition will be added onto the house. It'll go up a total of 4 stories, meaning a basement plus 3, and then that will be extra space. When the property is completed, you won't know or be able to really tell where the original house started, the addition started, and the transition between the old and the new. With that too, you're going to have all new walls on the outside of the property. Those party walls are going to be, they use the existing brick, but the wood framing gets completely replaced. And then the exterior of the house, the addition, will all be wood framed. And so again, it all becomes seamless, which then makes it so it's essentially a brand new home. Here we are on the lowest level of this new project. So here, as you can tell, we don't really have a lot of headroom. We did an earlier video a couple years ago about underpinning a house. And so that's taking this basement, which is currently, I'm gonna go 6.5 feet, and we're gonna bring it down to maybe 8 or 9 feet. In that process, you have to do something called underpinning because obviously this basement needs to be lowered. So in the process of lowering it, you actually dig down, you add a new footing to the bottom of the house, put a new concrete slab in, and then you actually go below the neighbor's wall. And you do that in a series of pits being drawn up by the engineer. You follow a very particular process to ensure that there's no structural damage to the adjacent homes or the existing property. And it allows us to reinforce the structural foundation of the home while gaining more basement space. The first step of that process here, in DC at least, is what we call a test pit. So here, in this hole, if you can see here, we have what's called a test pit. So here, what we call a geotech engineer, so an engineer that specializes in soil, we dig this hole, and you can see right here is the old footing of the existing property that we're in. So they look to see where's that footing end, and then they dig down to see the bottom of the footing, and then there's a hole there where they bore to get a soil sample to make sure that the soil itself has enough strength to withstand a new footing. So with that, they're going to dig down, test the soil, expose the existing footing, And then the architect knows how deep we're actually going to go down and the implications that that has on the structural integrity of this property and the neighboring properties. And you might wonder, how are we able to change somebody else's house? Well, in DC, we have something called a party wall. So the walls on this side and on the other side that are essentially the borderline walls between the neighbor and this house are what's called party walls, which is where you as the property owner of this property own half the wall. So if you were to think of a line going through the middle, you own half the wall, and your neighbor owns half the wall. And so with that, you're actually allowed to increase the footing on your half of the wall, which is technically going under the wall. And so that's how you're able to increase your basement and still essentially mess with a wall that's shared by two parties. Obviously, there's a DC process, DC permitting, there's engineers, there's notifications. It's a far more in-depth process as far as getting permission to do this, and it's overseen by an engineer to ensure that it all goes to plan and there are contingency plans and those sort of things. But it does allow these properties, which these basements would not be very useful right now, to be more useful to the modern day person. And you might wonder again, why are these basements so low? Well, DC is historically a wet city. There's definitely a lot of moisture in the soils here. And so with that, these basements for the most part were not lived in. They were dirt floors originally, primarily, and they were mainly there for your boiler and your mechanicals. So since nobody envisioned people living in these spaces, they were not built very tall. And in DC, technically, we still call them cellars. So even though we would say this is a basement, it's actually technically called a cellar when they look at it from an architectural point of view. So there's a little bit about what these houses look like, what they become, and how we get there. So this is the very early step. Architect is drawing the plans up, we're doing soil samples, and next step will be getting the permits in, and then obviously doing a little demolition.